Is your magic meter running low? Well, we've got a cure for you. Welcome to Disney Coast to Coast.
Hey folks, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast, the ultimate unofficial Disney fan podcast. I'm Jeff DePauli, and today on the show, my friend Courtney Guth from the Book of the Mouse Club podcast joins me to discuss the evolution of the iconic Cruella de Vil. Of course, Disney fans are getting ready for the release of the all-new movie Cruella, so we decided to take a look back at her origins in the original book, followed by the animated masterpiece, the live-action retelling, and now the latest live-action prequel. It was interesting to see what aspects of Cruella existed right from the very start, and what qualities she adopted along the way. Our conversation about a fashion diva who likes to kill puppies is coming your way right after this. Disneyland recently reopened, and now Disneyland Paris is getting to reopen. With all of the Disney parks soon to be open again, it's time to stock up on your Disney gear. If you're like me, you enjoy the minimalist, in-the-know sort of apparel that features a touch of Disney-inspired magic instead of having it plastered all over your body. If you feel the same way, be sure to check out the unique apparel available over at whositswhatsits.com. Whosits and Whatsits is regularly adding new merchandise, often for a limited time, so you won't want to miss out. Check out Whosits and Whatsits regularly, and don't forget that when you use code DCTC, you not only support this show at no extra cost to you, but you're also saving 15% off of your entire order. That's right, not just one item of your choosing, but anything and everything you order to add to your Disney wardrobe. So whether you're a frequent visitor to the site or have never visited before, check out Whosits and Whatsits using the link in this episode's description, and don't forget to use code DCTC when checking out to save 15% off of your total.
It's time to dive into today's Disney dialogue.
Hello, Courtney, and welcome for the first time to Disney Coast to Coast. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeff. Longtime listener, but happy to be a first-time guest.
And of course, you've become a Disney podcaster yourself with the Book of the Mouse Club, and you recently had me on to talk about none other than the junior novelization of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, which of course I was happy to be a part of.
I figured if we're going to keep the Disney podcast universe going, the perfect way to connect us was over your shared love of that film.
Yes, and you know what's so funny is, obviously, I'm super passionate about Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and when I first thought of you for this episode, I was like, okay, well, 101 Dalmatians started as a book, so that kind of ties in with your thing, but then I learned you are a diehard Cruella de Vil fan.
I absolutely am. She is one of my top villains. I think it's between her and Ursula most days, which I think is another strong choice, but...
Yes. Both of them have unofficial ties to Norma Desmond, one of my favorite characters ever written for the screen in the film Sunset Boulevard.
What's the Ursula tie?
So she was actually, that character of Norma Desmond was considered when they designed, they say it was like a mix of Norma Desmond and, the drag queen.
Divine.
Divine.
So I know Divine because I'm from Baltimore, so big John Waters fan right there. So I love it. It's a merger.
Yeah, it was a merger of those two things for Ursula. And Cruella de Vil has especially Glenn Close's Cruella de Vil has very Norma Desmond features because, of course she won a Tony for that role. But in any case, we're getting ahead of ourselves here. You were going to say your love of Cruella.
Yeah, my love, I feel like, stems from the park more than the film itself. I realized in revisiting this, it had been a while since I had watched 101 Dalmatians, but I think she's absolutely one of the most fun characters to meet in the park. And I think my love for her stemmed from being a little girl. There was this dinner, but it was all villains at 1900 Park Fair at Disney's Grand Floridian Resort and Spa. You got to interact while you were having dinner, and it was like Cruella, different characters came around, but I had this really memorable reaction with her, and from that moment on, I was like, she's my favorite. So I continue to love to meet her to this day.
That's awesome. I love that. And of course, today we're looking at the evolution of Cruella de Vil because we have the new Cruella movie coming out very soon, which we were both lucky enough to see. And, when you talk about Cruella, you have to start at the beginning. And that, of course, is the original source book called The 101 Dalmatians, all spelled out by Dodie Smith. And this came out in 1956. I had never read this before. How about you?
I hadn't. I think I remember seeing it at the library as a kid and being like, oh, there's a book about the movie, but I didn't check it out. So I finally got a chance to now.
Yeah, I gotta say, I really enjoyed this read. There were some things that I'm like, okay, that's very different. And then other things that I was like, this is even more similar to the book than to the movie than I realized.
I had heard, and I don't know if you came across this as well, but Dodie Smith writing this envisioned it being made as a movie and had that in her head. So I could see how things translated really well to the screen if she wrote it that way.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard that, but, that makes sense. I think every novelist wants their stuff to be made into movies, to be fair. But this, it's a children's novel, but it's more of a book than I realized. It's a children's chapter book. It's not like a sit down and read in one sitting. Well, you can, but it'll take several hours.
No, I agree. You and I read the junior novelization of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and that was like 89 pages. Definitely a more simplified reading level. But I'd say this was more of like a middle grade reading level. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed it as an adult. It had some meat to it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. And of course, there's a lot to this book, but we're really focusing on Cruella de Vil today. And this is the origins of Cruella de Vil. And, the first impression we get of Cruella in the book, I'm going to read a passage from it. It says, she was wearing a tight-fitting emerald satin dress, several ropes of rubies, and an absolutely simple white mink cloak, which reached to the high heels of her ruby red shoes. She had a dark skin, black eyes with a tinge of red in them, and a very pointed nose. Her hair was parted severely down the middle, and one half of it was black, and the other white. This was the first thing that I was like, no kidding. For some reason, I always assumed that was a Disneyfication choice.
Mm-hmm.
I was shocked that it goes back to the original source, her black and white hair.
And I love that the fashion is at the forefront. I think that's such a huge part of her character. It's part of her very dark motive in a way. So I loved the outfit descriptions throughout this book.
That's something I really want to get into when we get kind of the live action one, because yes, she's always been like a fashionista, but then at some point she becomes a fashion designer in the world of Cruella. And she's not in this original book nor the original animated film. And I found that to be really, really interesting. There are a lot of similarities and some differences. One thing from the beginning, Mrs. Dearly is essentially the Anita counterpart from the animated film. And it's said right from the beginning, Cruella de Vil and her went to school together. And that's something, their relationship is always really interesting to me. Because why does she just comes over like they're best friends or something? It's like she just shows up.
Yeah, I feel like I don't keep in touch with too many people from my school days, but the ones that I do, I'm close with, and I don't get the sense that they had a close friendship. It's just, they knew each other, but she comes over to her house for like a dinner party. She invites them into her house, so it's we'll see different parts of their relationship for sure. So that's been something that I think is the most diverse throughout.
Cruella is also married.
He took her last name. So DeVille is all her. That she's Cruella de Vil, that's her iconic name, and she made her husband take her last name.
Yeah, and he is a furrier. So, Of course, that makes complete sense as to why he's married to him. It makes sense. You mentioned the dinner parties and stuff. I love the description of the food. This was Cruella's dinner party. The soup was dark purple. The fish was bright green. The meat was pale blue. The ice cream was black. And it all tasted like pepper. I mean, they painted a very dark character here in the original book.
And I have to say, I was honestly a little surprised by how small her appearances are throughout the book. I mean, I think she's larger than life in her descriptions, but I was taking pictures of where she appeared of the text just for, to review a little later. And I'm like, I don't think I have that many pictures in this nearly 200-page book.
Yes, I have. I put Post-it notes on the pages where she's in, and it's about a dozen times, I'd say. But that's the thing about Cruella in general. I mean, even the animated film, of course, the first Glenn Close one, she's in more than the animated, but still, it's one of these roles that it's like they're not the focus, but they are the most memorable character in every single case. I would say the book, the animation, and the live action film.
I agree.
Always. And I think that that's really interesting. Oh, here's another great passage I loved. Something was puzzling Pongo. Colonel, why did Cruella steal so many Dalmatians? She can't want more than one Dalmatian fur coat. The sheepdog looked astonished. Surely you know her husband's a furrier. I understand she only married him for his furs. So that was it. Pongo had forgotten. But if the Devilles planned to sell Dalmatian coats to the public, then Hell Hall was nothing less than a Dalmatian fur farm, and no Dalmatian would ever be safe again unless Cruella's career came to an end. I must cope with that when I get back to London, thought Pongo. I love the revenge aspect from the dogs in this because we do not get that in the classic animation film.
That was such a fun climax in this one. And I like that we got a bit of her family history in regard to Hell Hall, how even her ancestors were kind of people in the town were scared of them. They're like taking pitchforks to the house, and then all of a sudden a supernatural storm comes and scares them away. So they're like, I think this man is the devil, and hence the last name.
Yeah, and we do get to see the dogs essentially destroy Cruella's home. We have that moment in the book. This is all stuff that, we don't get in the animated film. And it was interesting. She's a big character, but we know very little about her in the animated film. Yeah. Very little.
Which is why I think it's great that we get these additional source materials. And I have to say, as we go through each of these, I tried to pick a word for each of them, and I came up with 4 C's. So for our first Cruella...
Like Walt Disney's 4 C's.
No, those are the 4 keys.
No, he has 4 C's.
Oh, does he?
Yeah, so Walt's 4 C's were curiosity, confidence, courage, and constancy. So, yeah, Walt has 4 C's, and now you do for 101 Dalmatians. Let's hear them. A little
bit of a different tone. I'll do each one as we get to each depiction, but for our first one, I have that she's conniving. I feel like she plays a more active role in the kidnapping of the Dalmatians here, rather than there's Horace and Jasper do her dirty work, but she shows up for the nannies as a distraction while the Dearlys are out, and she's an active participant in that. I feel like we do get a few more encounters leading up to the capture of the Dalmatians, so you kind of see that plot emerging where she's like, ooh, I want these. Oh, I'm going to stick around at the dinner party where they're born. So I saw that element of her character come through.
All right, I like this little game you made for yourself. I love it. So conniving for the book. In the book, we get the classic line that she speaks to Jasper and what's his name? I think it's Saul in the book. We get that line of poison them, drown them, hit them on the head. And I was like, this is an intense character. For a children's book, there is a lot of talk of like murder in the book, even in the animated film. Like, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, she throws out a few different ways to harm those puppies, and they were rather explicit. And I was like, oh, this got really dark really quick.
Yeah, it's crazy. And, I do want to point out at one point toward the end of the book, after, these stressful events for Cruella, they do say that Cruella's hair goes from black and white to white and green because she's so stressed out. I kind of want to see that walk around character.
Yes, that would have been such a fun animated moment too. I picture a transformation like when we see the evil queen transform into the witch in Snow White, just like something really dramatic and full transformation.
Now, something that happens at the end that I love, that it's a little spoilery, but it's not that big a deal if you decide to go and read this book. But I love that the Dearlys, which was the name of the Dalmatians family, they buy Hell Hall at the end of this book, and they make it into their home. And I was like, okay, cool. So like this very dark location throughout the book becomes, the home of the Dalmatians in a happier place.
Yeah, we see them talk about homing them in others, but I agree with you. I like that this was explicitly, hey, we're repurposing this dark place to bring a new life and a new light to it.
Yeah, and it's a very enjoyable read. I gotta say, like, if you have a chance, I'd say if you're a fan of a 101 Dalmatians and or Cruella, check it out. It's, not a very long read, but there's enough difference that, want to pay attention while you're reading. It's not like, oh, I've heard all this before. I do want to mention before we move on to the animated film that there is a sequel book called The Starlight Barking. This came out in 1967, so it was 11 years later after the original book. Cruella de Vil is not in this book from what I understand after a quick search. I did not read the book, but a Google search told me she ain't in it, so just
That's
FYI.
a bummer. I don't even know if it's worth reading at that point.
I mean, kind of not. I mean, right?
She's so good.
She's the best part of the story. Anything else you want to add about the book before we move on?
No, I think we've covered a lot of it. I mean, she was in it so minimally that I feel like we've hit the highlights of her appearances, and then we can get into how that inspired the film.
Yes, so the animated film is called 101 Dalmatians, unlike the book that is The 101 Dalmatians. This movie came out in 1961, and this surprised me a little. This is only 5 years after the book was released. This was not like, the Walt Disney animated films that were taking, age-old fairy tales and turning them into animated films. This was during Walt's lifetime, a 5-year-old book being made into an animated film. I don't know if that was the first time, but I think it may have been.
I feel like you're right. I'm thinking of things like Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland, certainly more modern than the fairy tales, but also, at least 100 and so years old at that point, or maybe 150 even.
Yeah, crazy. Now, this film, I think you would probably agree with me. More than anything, what this film does is introduce us to the song Cruella de Vil, which is probably the most iconic thing to come out of, the films, I would say. Maybe her black and white hair, but the song is just so classic.
I'd say the song and the character itself, that they are the most memorable parts of the film.
Yeah, now one big change in this film, of course, the character of Roger is a music composer in the animated film, and he writes the song. Interestingly enough, that character of Roger in the book actually works for the government. He has something to do with taxes. So that was a huge difference. Obviously not Cruella related specifically, but a big difference between the book and the animated film. But we got to talk about Cruella's appearance in this animated movie because, her first appearance is so epic with her silhouette in the doorway. I honestly look at it and it feels to me like when you're seeing, a Broadway show and the star steps out on stage and the audience stops and applauds. Like, it's almost as if it was written for that moment.
I absolutely agree. And we can get into my second C here, which is she's commanding. Like, you can't keep your eyes off of her. Again, I feel like watching the movie, I was like, she's just not in it as much as I remembered, but such memorable moments. Certainly a bigger presence than the book, but still, she's in small doses, but they stick with you.
Well, the thing is, she had such an energy in the animated film that you don't get when you're reading the book. She is like a tornado coming through a room in the first scene that we see her.
I feel you and I were reading the book with the movie in mind because, of course, we were as Disney fans. I wonder what it was like for maybe children who had read this book, they're 5 years older now at this point, or even families, to see her on screen for the first time must have been amazing.
Yeah, I think that the design of Cruella de Vil for the animated film was definitely inspired by the book more than her energy. Her energy, I don't know, it just felt like a very strong choice by either the director of the movie or the voice actors or the animators or whomever. But I didn't pick up on that specifically just from the book.
Agreed.
Of course, we get, her very sharp-edged face. That passage I read talked about her pointed nose and stuff. We have a lot of pointed and sharp-edged features on the animated Cruella de Vil, which, of course, everybody knows the story. The reason why Mickey is so lovable is because he's all circles. He's all round and edges. He's soft. Cruella is the complete opposite of that.
I do want to talk about her relationship with Anita, though, because it is said once again that they're old school chums.
Yeah.
But that does not pan out for me because she looks so much older. Maybe it's the cigarettes that she smokes, but I'm like, what age is she supposed to be? And what age is Anita? Because there's no way they went to school at the same time.
That's funny. I'd never really thought about their age difference, but you're right. Like, yeah, you're right. That doesn't quite make sense. Maybe she was her teacher. Who knows? But yeah, the cigarette is a big deal in this animated film, which of course these days we would never have this, a character smoking in an animated film for quote unquote fun. But, not only does she have this cigarette and this long cigarette, what do they call them? Stems? Holders?
Yeah, I think so.
I don't even know. And the green cigarette smoke, like that
Iconic.
a whole thing in this film, and it's everywhere. This is the iconic look of Cruella de Vil. This is what people think when you say Cruella de Vil, I think.
Yes.
We get another awesome silhouette moment. I love her silhouette when, Cruella shows up when the night the puppies are born, and we get the flash of lightning against the door, and she shows up again. I'm just like, it's so theatrical to me. I love it.
I loved her because we really don't see a costume change from Cruella, which I think is a shame. Like, we lose out on a bit of that passion for fashion. But I love the scene when she's in her bed reading the newspaper about the puppies disappearing. Her hair is up in curls and she laughs maniacally. And to me, that's iconic as well.
Yeah, you're right. It's funny. These days, I feel like they throw in costume changes just so they can sell more dolls and costumes and stuff. Whereas, like, back then, it was like cartoon characters always wore the same clothes. It was definitely a different time. As you mentioned, she is mentioned as a schoolmate once again, so that's a consistency. But there is no explanation, once again, as to why she can just show up at the house. In fact, Cruella says something that makes you think that they're close, but maybe Cruella thinks they're closer than they really are. Because at one point when they're like, we're not going to sell the puppy, she goes, we're through. As if like that means something.
Though I did pick up on this. Roger suspects her right away when the puppies are missing. But Anita kind of comes to her defense and says, I admit she's eccentric, but she's not a thief. And I'm like, are you sure, Anita? Because, like, she hasn't really given you a reason to trust her, but maybe in their school days, I don't know.
Yeah, there's clearly a history there.
Yeah.
What it is, we really don't know, and we don't really ever find out in any of the versions, so perhaps there's a whole other thing there. Well, I guess we kind of found out in the newest film, but we'll get to that.
Yes.
Yes. In any case, once again, that classic line, poison them, drown them, bash them in the head. I just love that this is a line in a Disney animated film.
And then when she demands that they do the job tonight, I always just go to that scene in Fantasmic. I mean, I know they altered the line a little, but I was like, it's the Fantasmic line. There it is.
1000%. She's very physically abusive to Jasper and Horace in this film. She slaps them, which is, I don't think something we see very often in Disney animated films, unless there's like a full-on war like in Mulan or something. But I don't know, just the slap, I was like, oh, all right, we're getting into physical abuse now.
And her manic driving is so big here. She pursues the dogs a little bit in the book, but it was really only mentioned that she was at the scene of a fire as they're trying to get back home. And like, here you get that iconic shot where her eyes go crazed, like very similar to Mr. Toad as he's on his own.
I always think of Judge Doom. That's what I think.
Oh, that's a great
from Who Framed Roger Rabbit, yeah.
As well.
You're right. No, this was definitely, there's a lot of her in the car. There's a lot of fast car moments. This was, to me, I mean, the classic thing whenever you're turning a book into a movie is we need more action. We need more action. So like, okay, we're going to stick Cruella in a car and she is going to be a maniac in this car. She's a loud character. She has no finesse whatsoever. And I kind of love that about her.
I want to talk about the car, though. It had been probably 15 years since I had sat down and watched this film. Like I said, I really enjoy meeting her in the parks and seeing her in the Halloween stage shows. When she has the car accident, I think we're okay on spoilers on this one because the movie's been out for a long time. She just, as the kids would say, she gets yeeted from the car. The car flips over with her outside of it, and then she's still standing a minute later, and I'm like, how are you not dead? But you know what? Maybe she's a devil and it has something to do with that.
It's a good thing she is animated. We'll just say that.
Yes.
One really interesting thing about this film, just the history of the film, is that this was the first time they used xerography in a feature where they didn't, have to outline the line drawings with paint. They Xeroxed the actual artist's drawings, and that's what you see on screen. So that was a new process. But I believe it was when Floyd Norman was on the podcast talking about this. He was talking about how they actually built a model of that car that you were referencing, and they shot video of that car and outlined the video. So this film has a lot of animation history in it as well.
That's really cool. I feel the car is such an iconic part of her, and that's something that carries on through the next few. I mean, they say in the book that she has the loudest horn in all of London, but it doesn't really go into this hot rod coupe type car.
Yeah, for sure. I do want to mention on the DVD I watched, it was the Platinum Edition DVD, there's a special feature called Cruella de Vil, Drawn to be Bad. And some of the folks that are on this little mini documentary talking about it are Andreas Deja, Pete Docter, Brad Bird, and Disney Coast to Coast guests Floyd Norman and Don Hahn. And this was a great special feature. I'd seen that a long time ago and you reminded me of it. Was yours the Platinum Edition as well? Or I'm sure it's on many editions.
I had the signature edition, but it had that one on it, and it had another one that I want to touch on. But yeah, this was really fun to see people who didn't necessarily work on the film, but certainly have their ties to Disney reflecting on how iconic this villain is.
What was the other one that I don't believe I've seen? The other one
is Cruella de Vil in Mark Davis's own words.
Okay.
So they have some video footage of him. Were you able to see that one?
I did not see that one, but yes, the character was developed by Bill Peet and animated by Mark Davis, the iconic Mark Davis. So that was a good one as well.
I liked that. It was using archival footage, which I think is always great to see, and they put it together really nicely. He describes her as a flamboyant kind of character, which I absolutely agree. He says she's a funny villainess, not nice, but an entertaining character. And I like that he had that in mind for her because she, to me, is the most entertaining part of this film. But one interesting thing that I thought he said was, you draw from your own experience. We've all known people like this who do all the talking and never listen. And I just want to know who was Mark Davis's Cruella.
That's great. I love that. We talk about her look a lot, but one thing we've got to discuss is her voice. Betty Lou Gerson was the name of the voice actress. Some fun little Disney fun facts here. She's the old crone in Mary Poppins that you see the children run by in the street, as well as the narrator in Cinderella. But I think Cruella de Vil's voice is one of the most iconic Disney character voices of all time. It's a great voice.
I agree. So you took one of my trivia questions, but I had the backup. I was like, oh no, if we both watched this bonus feature, it was about the Cinderella tie, because we recently on Book of the Mouse Club like to go back to fairy tales and examine those source systems. So when we were talking about when we were talking about Cinderella, I came across that in just my own research. And I was like, wait, the narrator's Cruella? I mean, that just speaks to her range as a voice actress, because Cruella is so distinct, but then she is able to be this just, very fairy tale-esque once upon a time opening.
Yeah, very cool. I also want to mention, I'm sure a lot of people listening know that a lot of times they would bring in actors as kind of reference models for these characters. And the reference model for Cruella de Vil in the animated film was Mary Wickes, who is a character actress whom I love. If you're familiar with the movie Sister Act, she plays Mary Lazarus. If you're familiar with Disney's Hunchback of Notre Dame, she is the female gargoyle. And I love her from The Music Man. She's just immediately recognizable, wonderful character actress, and I love that she's the reference model for Cruella de Vil.
Who is she in The Music Man?
She, one of the pick a little, talk a little, pick a little, talk a little, cheep, 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 talk a little, pick a little more. Yeah, one of those women. And I don't know what the character's name was, but just one Grecian urn. She was one of those women. So
they're such a fun part of that. Yeah, Mark Davis, in reference to Mary Wickes, said that animation is an exaggerated form of acting. So I'm glad that they got, they have this exaggerated voice, but also the exaggerated acting talent to pantomime what they needed to really draw that character and bring her to life.
Yeah, I love Mary Wickes. I really need to go back. I haven't seen a ton of her stuff because she always has bit parts, right? I don't know if she ever starred in a movie, but she is just so memorable no matter what she does. She was wonderful. In any case, this animated film did have a sequel. It was called 101 Dalmatians 2, Patch's London Adventure. From what I understand, Cruella does appear in this. I did not see it. Have you ever seen it?
I haven't seen it. I believe it was one of those that came, I don't even think it was VHS home release, which was when I was growing up. I think it was one of those, it came out on DVD, so past my time of buying them. I did look at the plot synopsis, and she seems to be featured pretty heavily. Like, she's pretty much back and trying to capture some dogs again.
Yeah, so there was that, and then 101 Dalmatians, the series, was in 1997. So, they did quite a bit with these characters, but before the series, Are you ready to hop on to the live action film?
Oh, I am absolutely ready.
All right, 101 Dalmatians. This time it's the number 101, not spelled out. And this was 1996 with none other than the fabulous, the wonderful Glenn Close as Cruella de Vil. Listen, you don't get a star like that and not make that character the star of the... I mean, that character's the star of the movie, even without a star in the role. And when you put Glenn Close, it just becomes that, you know?
I wrote down that she's the living embodiment of the eccentricity that is Cruella.
It is one of those things where, like, first of all, this was probably my introduction to Glenn Close. I'm pretty sure it's the first thing I ever saw her in.
I think it was mine too.
Yeah.
And so that's always my reference point. But it's a great one.
It is. But it's kind of funny because I'm like, I can't picture anybody else. I mean, listen, like a lot of people will say, oh, they call Glenn Close when Meryl Streep isn't available. But I'll tell you what, I don't want Meryl Streep in this role. I want Glenn Close. And she is fabulous. First of all, if you don't follow Glenn Close on social media, you should, because she is crazy. But not like in a Frances McDormand crazy kind of way. Like in a fun, crazy kind of way. There's a huge distinction. Glenn Close she's nuts. And I love it. And like, she goes full in with this character. She's not screwing around. Like, I'm always impressed. And there are very few actors who can do this for me because I don't like overacting. And if character's over the top, you can very, very easily fall into the overacting category. There are two women that immediately come to mind that I'm like, you do it perfectly for me. You do things and I believe it, and I wouldn't believe it coming from anybody else. One is Glenn Close, and the second is Laurie Metcalf. From a lot of people know her from Roseanne, but she's a huge theater actress. She is so over the top in her performance. I would love to hear her play a Disney villain, by the way, just FYI. But actually, she's Andy's mom in Toy Story.
I was going to say, she's Andy's mom, but that's not a villain.
No.
So we need to give her a villain opportunity.
That's probably one of the most like sane characters she's ever played, Andy's mom. But yeah, I love the over-the-topness of Glenn Close's portrayal. I love the reveal of Cruella de Vil, the way that I talk about the silhouettes in the animated film. Well, in this live action film, it's such a slow reveal. Number one, we see the car that has become super iconic. Then
the license plate.
Right up. The Deville, close up of her feet. We have her walking into her office with like the hat hiding half of her face. And then, you know, it's just a great reveal. Once again, it feels super theatrical.
So going off of theatrical, my third C is camp. This is pure camp in the best way possible.
Yes, it is definitely camp. I love it. The cigarette holder is once again a prop in this, even in 1996. I do feel like this is something... Yeah, I don't even think in Cruella, the new one, she didn't smoke, did she? I
don't think she did, because I feel like now there's rules around... film ratings, like if you show someone smoking, it's automatically maybe PG-13 I think. Or something.
Yeah. So in 96, that was still a thing. It was still a big prop for Cruella de Vil. And I thought that was interesting. We see more of her world in this movie, which I found very interesting. We see her office. This is where she is defined as a fashion designer, which totally makes sense. Totally feels right, but is not from the original source material.
No, and I feel that this is a much more natural relationship between her and Anita, because in this case, Anita is someone who's been working for her, I think they say, for 2 years. She's a fashion designer as well, you know, under this House Deville label. She's sketching and catches Cruella's attention, and that just, I don't know, with the age difference visually makes more sense to me than to try and say these two people went to school together.
I would agree. It does make more sense. Obviously, it's a change and a difference, but it was a very good choice, I think. In that scene where, you know, we're seeing her at work for the first time, there's some just good freak out moments where she's like, take the drawing from Anita and hand it to me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like she just goes for it.
I was cracking up at that point. Like when she has him do it a second time and she's like, bring the drawing back to me. And I'm like, she's right there. It's such a great visual gag.
It's crazy. And then, you know, of course, that line, it would be as if I were wearing your dog. And, oh, is there anything better than the Glenn Close, Cruella de Vil laugh in the woof woof? I mean, that is a gif right there, and it's a wonderful gif.
I feel like you touched on this a little earlier, but there are touches of Norma Desmond in this performance, but I don't mind it one bit.
I would not. Actually, let me think about this. What year was Sunset Boulevard on Broadway? I was going to say...
I looked it up.
Was it 97? No,
it
95.
Was actually 93.
93,
so
okay.
It precedes it, because that was my question while I was watching this. I was like, wait, what came first, Cruella or Norma Desmond? And from my quick Google search, it said it was 1993. So about, if they're filming it, probably 2 years before, since this came out in 96.
Okay, I would bet money then that somebody in casting saw her in Sunset Boulevard. She did win the Tony Award for it, and I would bet money that that is how she got this role. I don't know if that's true or not, but that totally makes sense. Yeah, she's a crazy rich woman. I mean... We got Norma Desmond all over it. If you have no idea who Norma Desmond is, by the way, and you're listening to this, check out, Glenn Close is not in the original film, but it's called Sunset Boulevard. It's an old black and white film. It's one of my favorite films of all time. And then if you want, listen to the Glenn Close American cast album of that show.
And we're getting a movie, right?
We've been getting a movie for about 10 years now. Who knows?
I just want her to get her Oscar, Jeff.
I know. It's almost laughable that she doesn't have an Oscar at this point.
It's so sad.
It's crazy. But yeah, I was lucky enough to see her do it on Broadway with this recent revival in 2017. And that was a dream come true, quite honestly. In fact, in my office, I have the poster of her as Norma hanging on the wall. I look at it every day. I adore her as Norma Desmond. It's my favorite Andrew Lloyd Webber musical. It's so freaking good. And I highly suggest it to anyone and everyone. But in any case, I do want to mention we get the classic silhouette of Cruella on the window the night that the puppies are born. And I'm like, I'm so glad somebody recognized how brilliant that is and was like, we're sticking that in the live action.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to be watching these kind of back to back over the past few nights. And I saw that parallel immediately. And I was like, oh, I'm so glad they did that. Because it had been a while since watching this one as well. And I was like, ooh, I wonder if they'll do that. And a great visual parallel.
Yeah, I don't think I'd seen this one since it came out, to be completely honest, or at least not all the way through. So it had been a very long time. They did modernize it. I want to say that John Hughes wrote the script. And yeah, and John Hughes, if you don't know, I mean, obviously had all those 80s Brat Pack movies. But the thing that I thought of immediately when watching this, I see it in your eyes. You're going to say it too, right? This is Home Alone.
Home Alone, but with animals.
This is Home Alone, because in this film we see, first of all, Jasper and Horace are essentially the wet bandits, and we see Cruella go through all of these like traps, and like she is a mess by the end of this movie. Just all of these different things that she goes through that is completely the finale of Home Alone, like 100%. So when I saw his name on screen, I was like, all right.
I use Letterboxd, and I don't always write reviews, but for this one I wrote Home Alone, but with puppies, because the last 40 minutes of the film or so just felt completely lifted. And I have to say, even Hugh Laurie looks like, I can't remember the name of the character.
Oh, Daniel Stern.
Who's not Joe Pesci.
Yeah.
The other one. There's a shot where they're on the electric fence and fry themselves, and it's an aerial shot. I'm like, you could just sub that for a shot from Home Alone, and no one would blink.
I'm not going to lie. I was thinking to myself, I was like, if I were a YouTuber and a good editor, I would go through Home Alone and this movie and like make some sort of compilation or parallels or whatever, because I mean, it was, I'm telling you guys, if you haven't watched 101 Dalmatians in a long time and you're very familiar with Home Alone, go back and watch it, because it's kind of crazy how parallel they are at moments.
And I think they had to do that because a huge difference in this live action film is that the animals don't talk. Even in the book, it's kind of the narrator, is interpreting Pongo's thoughts and how he reacts to his master. So there's dialogue between the dogs. We get that in the animated film, but there's a sense of realism to this film, the live action, and that the animals don't talk. So like, what are you going to do for the kids? I guess you're going to give them animal hijinks and Home Alone gags.
Yeah, I actually think they did a brilliant job, because at first it would be one of those things I feel like where you're like, well, you can't tell this story without at least hearing the animal's inner thoughts. And I'm like, no, you know what? It works. Like the way that they use the animals works. And yes, the human characters are more centralized. I think part of that, like we keep saying, Cruella is not a huge part of the story in the book and the animated film. So I think that they recognized Cruella is an iconic character, and we have Glenn Close. So she has to be in more of this film than she has been in any other iteration. How are we going to do that? And all right, well, give her some crazy antics to do, and she will go full out and do them. And it worked.
I know you're a big fan as well of like early 90s Disney MGM studios. Do you remember the walkthrough set of, it had like sets from this film and costumes on display? That was there a long time, I feel like.
Yes, it was the finale of the studio tour where you walked off through like a little museum, and it was a lot of costumes from this film because, of course, now she has many costumes in this, unlike the animated film we were talking about. She, you know, she's a fashionista, she's a fashion designer in this, and so she has a lot of cool wardrobe in this. And yeah, I do remember seeing some of the mansion set. I believe the car was at Disney MGM as well.
The Iron Gate, I feel like the entrance to Hell Hall. That was such a fun walkthrough.
Yeah, one thing I will say is, looking back on the movie, it looks a little cheap as far as the sets are concerned. Like, everything looked like a set, if that makes sense. And that's not great. I don't remember thinking it at the time, but looking back on it, I'm like, I don't know. Just, I had this situation recently as well. I went back and watched Edward Scissorhands. I was like, wow, I think of this as such like a grand scope movie. I'm like, this is a much smaller film than I realized. And I kind of got that feeling a little bit from 101 Dalmatians.
I didn't pick up on it as much, but it makes sense because I immediately thought of the sets that we saw at Disney's MGM Studios when I would see certain scenes. So it's like they probably just lifted them and put them there.
Yeah. Now, her discussion about murdering the dogs is a little less extreme in this. She says, drown them for all I care. So we don't get the bashing over the head, I don't believe, and some of the other more specific things. But it's still in there. So it's such a great line. It's horrible. Any Dalmatian lovers are probably yelling at me right now. But come on, it's a good line. The delivery is on point.
I mean, I think that's what makes her such a great villain, is that she's not someone who has magical powers or is like a witch. She's just this really dark woman who's out to murder dogs. I mean, that is horrifying and horrible, but it makes her a strong, truly evil person.
Yeah, she's a true villain. Hands down, no question about it. I love it.
I'd say her and Frollo are like up there in terms of dark motives, because Gaston doesn't have any powers, but he's just like, I'm not a nice guy.
Yeah, for sure. And let's see. So the laugh we talked about, she's a maniac driver once again in this. The car is iconic, and she's nuts. One thing that happens toward the end of the film, now, you know, Roger is still an artist in this, but instead of a composer, we don't get the song, by the way, through the film, but we get it for the end credits. So it's still part of it, still part of the universe, but it's not part of the movie. So in this, you know, Roger, played by the brilliant Jeff Daniels, is a video game designer instead of a composer. And one thing that happens at the end is we see that he makes the villain of his video game Cruella de Vil, essentially, and this is how he ends up making a lot of money. The thing that I thought was such a miss here was the design of Cruella, because the design of Cruella in the video game doesn't look like Glenn Close, really. And it doesn't look like the animated Mark Davis one. I would have loved for the Cruella in the video game to just be the one we know from the animated movie. I think that would have been such like a fun throwback. I would have loved that.
Yeah, because there are throwbacks to other Disney animal films. At one point, the dogs are watching the Aristocats.
Oh, you're going to steal my trivia questions now, are you?
Oh, all right, now we're even.
It's funny. It's definitely an enjoyable version of the story. Glenn Close is fantastic. And I will mention there is a sequel movie called 102 Dalmatians. Don't waste your time, is what I'll say. Oh, God. It was rough because it's basically the beginning of the film. They take everything we love about Cruella and strip it away. She's now been through therapy. She loves playing with dogs. She hates fur. And of course, something happens that, you know, she switches back. But, I felt a little bad for Glenn Close watching this one. I was like, oh, she couldn't have thought that this was good.
I did not watch it in preparation for the show, but I feel like I watched it about 10 years ago. When I was in college, I had a VHS I still had my VHS tapes and my VCR from home, and so friends would bring their VHS tapes over, and someone wanted to watch 102 Dalmatians, and we watched it. I was like, why did you make us do that? Like, we didn't even watch 101 Dalmatians before. Like, she just really liked 102 Dalmatians. So 10 years, I'm good. I remembered it was bad.
It does have a very attractive actor in it, though, whom I believe is in Titanic, if I'm remembering correctly. The lead guy in 102 Dalmatians.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's kind of the best part of it. I mean, him and,
I'm here for that.
Him and Glenn Close.
Close.
Yeah, exactly. But are you ready to move on to the latest iteration of Cruella de Vil?
I am so excited. Thank you so much for inviting me on to talk about this, because I was so pumped to see it anyway. So I'm like, all right, now I get to talk about it.
Yeah, no, well, here's the interesting thing. Of course, we're talking about the latest Cruella, which is hitting theaters and Disney Plus Premiere Access on May 28th, 2021, which is just a couple days after this episode is released. We have Emma Stone as Cruella and Emma Thompson as the Baroness, which is a new character. This is a prequel. This is an origin story. And, you know, you say you were super excited for it. It's interesting because it depended on the trailer for me. They've had several different trailers. Some of them didn't interest me at all. Others, I was like, I cannot wait to see this. So it was kind of fascinating in that sense.
And in my corner, the announcement I was very hesitant about. I was like, oh, why? Like, do we need this? But then I think it must have been like the first like full trailer that we got. I was like, you know what? I'm intrigued. I'm going to give this a chance, and I'm so glad I did.
Yeah. Now, we're not going to give away any plot point spoilers here since you've probably not seen it yet, but the first bits we're talking about here, they were revealed in like the first few minutes of the movies, if not even the trailer, so I don't feel bad I wouldn't even use the word spoiling, but it's giving away a little bit of information. And the hair, going back to that black and white hair, Cruella was born this way, we find out in like the first minute of the film.
I was so glad we got an answer to that, because I feel like that's been an outstanding question for me. And I was like, all right, she was born with it. I'll accept that. Cool.
She was born this way. Yeah. And her name is not Cruella. That's not her birth name. Her name is Estella, which I also found to be really smart. I never really thought about it, but yeah, I guess who would name their child Cruella, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't happen.
And I like, we won't spoil anything, but the dichotomy of how that comes to be I think it was answered appropriately.
Yeah, I would agree. Now, in this, we see her relationship with Anita does go back to school at a very young age. And so that follows the book and the animated film. This is different, of course, from the Glenn Close versions. But yeah, it goes back to the original source with that. It was interesting to see Anita and her just friends at a young age, as well as Jasper and Horace. She meets them as kids, which, you know, that was a question that was never answered in the original. So that was interesting to see. I feel like you have a ton to say about this film, so I'm going to let you go.
Sure.
Yes.
I can reveal my fourth and final C, and that is that she is creative. This movie focuses on her love for fashion, her career, how she channels that creativity in many different ways, some good, some bad. So to see that all come to play was a lot of fun. Yeah,
so they do indeed continue this narrative of her being a fashion designer that the Glenn Close movies kind of introduced. So that is, part of the Cruella origin story, according to this movie. It does, and I've seen a lot of people say this, but it does have a very Devil Wears Prada kind of feel to this movie.
It does. But I felt it was different enough in that it's in a different time period. There are different elements to the relationships that come to be within the film. I have to say, this movie had an amazing soundtrack. Like, I want this released on vinyl.
That is in my notes, because I was like, okay, I would not be surprised if half of the budget went to music rights. This
hit
movie
after hit.
This movie has more songs in it than a musical, and I'm not even kidding.
No, I'm with you.
They don't break out into songs, but it's part of the background music, and a lot of it is older tunes with, covers of older tunes in a lot of cases. Yeah. It is top to bottom filled with just music that fits, and it felt right, even if it was wrong. Like, I have no idea if the time period was correct, but it was great.
No, I'm pretty sure it was because it's taking place in the mid 70s, and I believe it was all like 70s tracks, but it felt like a long form music video at times, but not in a way that I was like, oh, another song. I'm like, yeah, I'm here for this.
I 1,000% agree. The music rights must have been insane, but I liked it because some of the trailers made it feel that way. And that was actually, since we had various versions of trailers, I did think to myself, I'm like, the ones with the kind of iconic music were the ones that I gravitated towards. So I love that the movie actually had that feel to it. It's crazy. And this has nothing to do specifically with Cruella, but the soundtrack was nuts.
They better do a vinyl. I feel like vinyl ties into the 70s time period of the film. It's having a resurgence. Like, I will give you back your money that it's spent to do the music if you let me buy this vinyl.
It's true. It's crazy. One thing that we find out in this movie that I will not spoil, but we do get a reason is to, Cruella has a good reason for hating Dalmatians in this film. Yes. And it's more than just, they'd make a pretty coat. And I found that to be interesting. It definitely answered questions, some that I didn't even realize I had, but was like, oh, cool.
Yeah, I think they're such fun wink and nod moments, so I don't want to give any of them away, but I'm with you. Like, there was little parts where I would smile because I'm like, oh, I see what you did there.
Yeah, I don't think this is spoiling. Well, in this, it's a difference because you talked about the last name Deville in the animated film and how the husband took her last name. Now, in this film, she chooses that last name, which I thought was really interesting. I'd never thought about that. And they do a lot of things with names here. She chooses the last name Deville. How Hell Hall becomes Hell Hall, I found to be very interesting, how it got that name. Just clever stuff.
And I think clever is the right word because often
and that's a C.
There you go. It's a fifth C.
It's a fifth
bonus.
C.
Oftentimes it's a fine line in these like prequel type things where it can get very corny very fast, or a moment where you just roll your eyes like, oh yeah, of course, there it is. But I didn't really feel that through this.
There was a moment, especially with Roger, I was like, oh, okay. I was like, okay, so that's Roger, like... And I will say the end, like the credit scene, which happens right toward the beginning of the credits, definitely contradicts the story that we know and love of 101 Dalmatians. And as somebody who enjoys continuity and, it definitely contradicts quite a bit what we know. So that was a little bit like, ooh, why'd you do that for me? But...
Speaking of the credits, though, did you pick up who one of the executive producers was?
Yeah, it's Glenn Close.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm so excited I don't know if you knew that going in. I did not. And so when I saw it, it warmed my heart a little.
I did know that going in because I'm not going to lie. When I heard that they were doing a Cruella movie with a live action, I'm like, how dare they put anybody but Glenn Close in this role? And then so I kind of looked into the film a little bit and I saw that Glenn Close was an executive producer. I was like, okay, number one, it's kind of cool that they quote unquote offered that to her. I don't know what her involvement was. My guess is probably very little. But that's kind of cool. Unless
there's a respect there.
Respect. And who knows? Maybe there was something in a contract that said who knows? She's an A-list movie star. She could have had something in the contract that said anything to do with this character while I'm alive, or at least in live action. Who knows? I don't know. But she's an executive producer. So part of me is like, all right, if she approves, I think I can like this. And I'm not saying by any means that Emma Watson is Glenn Close. Emma Stone, sorry. What did I say? Watson, the Harry Potter girl? No, sorry.
That's Belle.
Yeah, that's right.
I was just going to say, I feel that Glenn Close has such an affinity for the character. This is going to be a total aside, but did you watch that fundraiser Hocus Pocus thing that Bette Midler hosted this October? And Glenn Close makes a cameo appearance as Cruella in that. She still has the wig at home or something.
I'm telling you, she's crazy. She is.
I'm going to go follow her on social media after this.
Follow her on Instagram. She is nuts in the best way. She's like the grandmother everybody wants. Oh yeah. It's so funny. But yes, I unfortunately did see the Hocus Pocus special. But we'll just leave that there. And let's see. What else about this film? What stuck out to you?
Yeah, on my end, I was just very on the fence going in, got excited by the trailer, but I felt this could go either way for me. So I had texted my friend just talking about film as we do, and I said, here's what I want from this film. I want insight into her character and maybe her descent into madness, but I don't want an excuse for her behavior. Like, let our villains be flawed. And I want high fashion, fun visuals, and Emma Stone versus Emma Thompson fabulousness. And I feel like I got that all.
You said something very interesting that I hadn't thought of, and that is don't make an excuse for her evil. And you're right, because like Maleficent, we get an excuse. If you think of something like Wicked, we find out why the Wicked Witch is the way she is. And they didn't do that. She is, no. I mean, she has reasons, but they're not good reasons. Like,
exactly.
Stuff happened to her. It's not just like she was born evil. Well, she kind of was. But you're 100% right. And I hadn't really thought about that, and that's great. And I will say I very much enjoyed the movie. So I would suggest any Disney fan see it. And
yeah, I agree.
I would love to see like a wrestling match between Glenn Close as Cruella de Vil and Emma Stone as Cruella de Vil.
But also throw Emma Thompson into the mix, because we won't give too much away about her character, but I thought she was a strong performance as well.
She was. In fact, I could see her playing Cruella de Vil. I could see her doing that part. I don't want Glenn Close not to do it if they were ever to do an adult version again, but I think she has a sassiness to her. She was great in this movie. She was great.
She's so good when she's bad, meaning like playing a bad, fun character. I feel like she has so much fun with that mischief element of it.
I'll tell you what, this is what I want to see. I want to see just totally randomly sometime at the Oscars, an anniversary year for 101 Dalmatians. I want to see a tribute where we have a bunch of iconic actresses come out as Cruella de Vil. Of course, we would need Glenn Close. We can throw Emma Stone in there. I would say throw in Emma Thompson. I would say throw in Meryl Streep. I would say throw in Liza Minnelli and maybe Patti LuPone. And let's just have
Patti would be great.
Let's have a Cruella moment.
The live action is 25 years old this year, as old as that makes me feel. So there you go. Start planning.
Yeah, for sure. And, I really enjoyed the film. I highly suggest people check it out. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see myself, even though I watched it, I will be revisiting it, because it was just so much high energy fun for me.
Yeah. And you can see it this time without your name scrolled across it as well.
Yes. And that was a little disorienting for me. I was like, every so often I'm like, that's my name. Oh, yeah, that's a watermark.
Too funny. Well, in any case, I do want to touch before we get to some trivia, just how, this character has lived on in a way that I find really interesting in the parks. Because I don't know about Walt Disney World, but in Disneyland, it is very common just to see this character walking around. I'm not talking about a Halloween event. I'm not talking about anything special. I'm talking about like hanging around with Mickey and Minnie and the Fab Five sort of thing. And that's really interesting, because I don't feel like 101 Dalmatians is a movie that people talk about too much, but she is clearly an icon.
It's all her. Unfortunately, over here on the East Coast, it isn't as common outside of Halloween. She really does have a presence. I dressed up as Cruella for Halloween in 2015 and had the opportunity to meet her, and we had a full-on photo shoot, and it was amazing. So she had a stationary meet and greet position, but in later parties, Cruella roamed around, and it was more of that Disneyland style where you would get to encounter her organically, and just as fun.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I see her a lot at Disneyland, so that's kind of cool. And she's an icon. And by the way, fun little weird factoid, do you happen to remember, there was a re-release of 101 Dalmatians during my childhood, the animated film. I can't remember when it was. It was probably the 90s at some point. And they had a whole McDonald's Happy Meal. Do you remember this?
With 100 toys,
101 Dalmatians. They made 101.
101, that makes sense.
Yeah, there were 101 different Dalmatian toys. Of course, Cruella did not get a figure.
She should have.
Because, it was all about the Dalmatians. But, I mean, I don't think McDonald's had ever done a promotional Happy Meal on that level.
I went to 100 because they did it again for the 100 Years of Magic.
Wow, did they?
Celebration with Walt, where it's like 100 years of Disney characters and similar. But I think those are the only two on that scale. I will say I remembered that when we were watching the movie, and I think it was actually tied to the live action release. When it came out, even though they're not, they are very much the animated toys, but I feel like my age wise, that would have been it. So we were watching the live action, and I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I remember these toys from 1996. Do you remember these toys? And I found them on eBay for $99. And I was like, or maybe $95. And I was like, you know what? 95. I didn't buy them, but I felt like $95 for 101 toys is not a bad deal.
Less than $1 a toy. I'd say that's a good deal.
They had a carrying case.
Yes.
It was Dalmatian carrying case. I'm thinking about it, Jeff. It might show up on my Instagram.
Well, I'll tell you what, you should do it. I'm going to encourage you to do it. I do remember the carrying case, though. Yeah, that was pretty cool. In any case, this was a lot of fun talking about Cruella de Vil. This is a character that has been, alive since 1956, so she's been around for a long time. And here we are in 2021 with a brand new film all about her. But I think it's time for some trivia.
Do you know the answer? Get your brain gears churning and play along. It's trivia time.
Alrighty, Courtney, do you want to hit me with a trivia question first, or shall I hit you?
I'll hit you because I'm so afraid of it being stolen again. So Cruella's story may not have been limited to just 101 Dalmatians. Unfortunately, this ended up not being the case, but animators considered her bringing her back as the villain in another Disney film. Do you know what that one was?
I want to say The Rescuers.
Is
that right?
Yeah. Instead of Madame Medusa, it would have been Cruella, and she would have had not fur, but an alligator outfit.
Wow.
So moving into a different animal skin.
Yeah, that's interesting. In fact, in that little documentary we were talking about on the Special Features DVD, they talk about that villain in The Rescuers and how it was kind of a competition because I forget who the animator was, but whoever it was
I want to say Ken Anderson.
Okay, I'm not certain either. But whoever it was, they were a little jealous of Mark Davis's work on Cruella, and it was the kind of a battle between them. But Cruella's clearly more iconic. But yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that. That was kind of a wild guess, but that makes sense. I could totally
a good guess. I feel like
I could see it though.
She's a diet version of Cruella.
Yeah, I could totally see that. My question for you, you've partially answered. In the Glenn Close 101 Dalmatians, the Dalmatians are watching TV at one point, and 2 Disney movies can be seen as they change the channel. What movies did they see? You said one already.
I got Aristocats.
Yeah, and what was the other one?
Was the other one Lady and the Tramp?
No, it was live action.
Oh, I don't know the live action. The Aristocats stuck out to me.
So they're watching the Aristocats and they changed the channel in that same scene, and it's Homeward Bound.
Oh, how fun. Yeah, it's like very, very quick. But now I remember that it's like one of the dogs speaking towards the end. That's a good fit. And a more modern, like they're close in their release time.
Well, it was funny. I don't know if I've ever seen Homeward Bound, to be honest, but when they did it, when they changed the channel, I went, is that Homeward Bound? And I took a note and looked it up, and sure enough, it is. So I was like, all right, that makes sense. Synergy. Always synergy.
Yes,
actually, it's interesting in all of the films, like there's TV watching by the animals, and there's always kind of interesting things on the screen. In fact, I think in the animated one, did you catch? It looked like one of them was like a silly symphony, one of Walt's silly symphonies.
Yes.
Yeah.
With flowers.
Yes.
It looked like that, very much the Iwerks flower, like 1930s style. I didn't take the time to look that up either, but I can picture exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. So they kind of like threw these little gems in there. It's great. I also love the story of like Jasper and Horace watching the TV of this game show where like the people on there are criminals, and their dream. What's my crime? And their dream is to like be on the show. And like that starts all the way back with the book, which I found fascinating.
Yeah, when I saw that in the book, I was like, oh.
Yeah, stuff like that felt like Disney invention. I was like, no, this goes back to the source material. It's very, very interesting. And one little other fun fact was, did you catch what character plush toy was on top of Roger's computer screen in the live action Glenn Close film?
I did.
Figment.
I love Figment. I'll have to go back and check for that.
So yeah, well, Courtney, thanks so much for coming on. Why don't you let folks know where they can find you and all about your podcast?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. If you want to just keep up with me personally, you can follow Glenn Close first and then come for me. I am at Courtney_Guth on Twitter and at Great Guthsby on Instagram. But I do host Book of the Mouse Club with my lovely co-host, Emily, and we're kind of a niche podcast that focuses on the literary side of the Disney sphere. We read books about Disney parks, about the films, books like 101 Dalmatians that inspired the film, those that tie in, and we also interview various authors who have written about Disney. Coming up, to tie directly to our lovely discussion here, there was a young adult novel that you actually let me know about called Hello, Cruel Heart by Maureen Johnson and released by Disney Publishing as a tie-in. It's like a prequel to the prequel almost, focusing on Cruella or Estella's teenage years. So in about 2 weeks, Emily and I will be reading that as our June selection, and I will surely reference all of the fun we had here, but we'll keep the characterization going on our show.
Excellent, and I will include links so you can check out Book of the Mouse Club over in the show notes for Disney Coast to Coast as well, so check that out at DisneyCoastToCoast.com. And Courtney, thank you once again for coming on the show.
Thank you again for having me.
I hope you all enjoyed today's conversation. In the last couple of episodes, we talked about Muppets Haunted Mansion coming to Disney+, along with a new Halloween party coming to Magic Kingdom. And if you haven't listened yet, be sure and check out my interview with Frankie A. Rodriguez from High School Musical, the musical, the series. The easiest way to make sure you don't miss any of the magic is by subscribing to Disney Coast to Coast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Wherever you search, don't forget, it's Disney with a Z, Coast to Coast. You can find any links mentioned in this episode, along with ways to connect with today's guest co-host by checking out the show notes at DisneyCoastToCoast.com, or you can find a link to the show notes in this episode's description. Help ensure more free episodes of the podcast and gain rewards by joining the DCTC community at patreon.com/DisneyCTC. And don't forget to leave a voicemail at 818-860-2569 to share your thoughts on today's conversation and the chance to be heard on a future episode. Which version of Cruella is your favorite? Have you ever read the original book? Let me know on the hotline. Once again, that's 818-860-2569, or find the number in this episode's description, along with a link for some free gifts from me to you. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!
Thanks for listening to Disney Coast to Coast. Have a magical day.
Disney Coast to Coast is produced and hosted by Jeff DePauli. Learn more about the podcast and become a supporter at DisneyCoastToCoast.com. This podcast is part of the DePodcast Network. Learn more about this show, plus find more quality and entertaining podcasts at DePodcastNetwork.com. That's DEPodcastNetwork.com.